I'm Bob Miller. I'm chair of Marine Conservation League's Climate Action Working Group. And as I've said in the past, Marine Conservation League's mission is to preserve, protect, and enhance the natural assets of Marin in a changing environment. Now, could people put themselves on mute because I'm hearing an echo? So for those of you who are members, thank you for being a member. And if, because we need your support. For those that are not yet members, you can join at marineconservationleague.org/donate. Again, we do need your support. I'm going to put the agenda up on since I find the agenda. Here we go. Great. So for this meeting, the agenda will be as follows. We're going to have Matt Golden, who's CEO of Recurve, talk about virtual power plants, managing customer demand as an energy resource. We'll then hear from Alex Valenti on MCE's Peak Flex Market program. And then we'll have a discussion on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruling that reversed Berkeley's ban on natural gas hookups for new buildings. And then we'll have reports from organizations. Next month, we're going to have two new supervisors, Mary Sackett and Eric Lucan. And they'll talk on the opportunities and challenges of implementing the Marin County's climate action plan. A couple of housekeeping items. First of all, as I indicated before, please keep yourself on mute. Put your questions in chat. Know that we're recording this meeting, and we'll want to ask all the speakers for their permission to make the recording available. If you're interested in developing and advocating for innovative positions that accelerate greenhouse gas emissions reduction, do contact me, and you can join a group of others who are doing just that. And I've left my email at the bottom of the agenda. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing. So before I get to Matt, I just want to say at Climate Action Working Group, we include speakers who talk about a mix of ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and sequester carbon. Those speakers provide us with information that we need to know in order to know what to advocate for and how to. We've heard about issues at the federal and state level from Jared Huffman and Damon Connolly. And again, we'll hear about challenges at the local level from the two new supervisors. Over the last year, we've learned about longer term innovations that we'll likely want to advocate for, but years down the road, like offshore wind and carbon removal from the atmosphere. We've heard about issues that we're advocating for right now, which is building electrification and vehicle electrification. But we also want to hear about emerging innovations to reduce greenhouse gases, innovations that we have to really seriously consider advocating for. For example, last month, Dan Seganin talked about 24/7 renewable energy matched hourly to electricity demand. And this month, we're going to focus on another emerging important innovation that may well be a focus of our advocacy: virtual power plants that manage customer demand as a grid energy resource. Now, demand flexibility, which is managing customer demand, has been around for about 40 years, but recently it's poised to grow rapidly. 3 weeks ago, the California Energy Commission approved a state load shift goal of 7,000 megawatts, which is double the current level. That's adding about 3 gigawatts of demand flexibility as an energy resource by 2030. To put that in perspective, that's at least 10% of the expected increase in generating capacity by 2030. And the California Energy Commission has promised to revisit the level of that goal, so it could well go up. On virtual power plants that manage customer demand flexibility, there's no one better to turn to than Matt Golden, who's CEO of Recurve, a Marin-based firm. Recurve's well-vetted methods estimate how much flexible demand acts as a grid resource, which enables paying for it, which opens up a much bigger market. And Matt has gotten kudos from a number of folks, including Jigar Shah, who's the director of Department of Energy's huge renewable energy loan program, who said in a recent interview that measurement and verification of demand flexibility is actually quite robust and quite amazing, as Matt Golden and some other folks at Recurve and others have shown. So Matt is a Mill Valley resident, nationally known for his energy efficiency and demand flexibility work. I'm going to let Matt take over and talk about what he has been up to. Matt?
Introduction. Hello, everybody. And it's great that Alex is here as well, because frankly, working with large utilities across the country, MCE was amongst the first to really engage and work in some of the more innovative aspects of implementing virtual power plants, kind of needing to step out of the current frame that we've been in with a lot of utility programs over the years that really weren't designed around resource acquisition in truth, and didn't really leverage things like AMI data and grid value and all of that. So the work that we did with MCE that Alex will touch on and I'll also talk about as well, really became the template for the state of California on how to actually roll some of this stuff out. And the numbers that we're getting back now that it's actually being deployed at a larger scale demonstrates that there is real value in unlocking the market and kind of shifting away from traditional utility programs towards more market-based solutions. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let's see. And I'm going to go on slightly. Let's see. Sorry. Let me see if I get this right. All right. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Excellent. We get video back up. All right. So as Bob was saying, Recurve is technically, until very recently, the headquarters was out of Mill Valley. We are a remote company. We have people all over the country, but I live here in Mill Valley, and our management team is primarily in the Bay Area. And I'm a longtime MCE customer for what it's worth. So real kind of diving into things. When we talk about virtual power plants, it's become really an overpacked and overused term. It means everything to everybody. But I'll get a little bit into kind of the way we think about what a virtual power plant is. So the first kind of fundamental idea is that the grid in general has always been built around supply side resources, which is we're going to build power plants and transmission distribution lines, and people will use energy. Obviously the grid is, gets talked about as the most complicated machine, which on one level is totally true. It's also really simple. We just have to have enough electricity at every moment of the day to meet demand in every place on the grid. That's really the game. So supply and demand have to be matched or closely matched for the grid, for the lights to stay on. And that's really what it's all about. And so the entire grid has been built in a hub and spoke model over the years. We've all seen the, CAISO and other independent system operators with their giant CRTs, and they've got power plants and transmission lines and distribution systems, and it all fits and you can kind of keep track of it. It's all very complicated, but it's kind of finite. But increasingly, as we decarbonize and move to renewable energy sources, and which are clean, but frankly, things like the sun have a tendency to go down every day, whereas natural gas you can, not entirely, but you can throttle up and down as you need, kind of differently. So that's created a lot more pressure on balancing resources. How do we use the energy when we got it, and either store it to use later or shift when we use energy to meet and be aligned with when that supply is online, when the sun is up, particularly here in California. So, in Reeker's logo, we have these 3 lines actually, which is, not just meant to be a homage to Tesla. It's because the demand side is identical to the supply side. If you can reduce demand, that has the equivalent exact effect as generating more energy at the same time. And that's really the opportunity and then the requirement when we talk about virtual power plants, is to fully decarbonize the grid. Frankly, at this point, I haven't seen math that really shows how we get there in any real terms. The scale of the requirements to balance load gets so big as we electrify buildings and electrify transportation in particular. So the need to not just have supply side solutions, you can't just do it with more supply side generation, but also harness demand and reduce and shift it so that it more closely aligns and become really acute. And the advantages of the demand side is that it tends to be cheaper than the supply side. It doesn't have things like interconnection queues and all sorts of kind of grid side complexity. And it has this major benefit, which is it also helps customers, right? Like it helps customers reduce their bills and improves their buildings, which you never get on the supply side. So our basic thesis is that we should be doing all things on the demand side that are available cheaper than the alternative, because they're low cost and they help customers, right? Whereas everything we do on the supply side, we need to do that too, but that actually increases grid costs and ultimately increases rates for everybody. So that's kind of the overall arching idea. And to us, a virtual power plant, we'll get more into this, is pretty much a catch-all. It doesn't mean one thing, but it's how one shapes demand, both on a long-term basis. So when we talk about energy efficiency, that is long-term load shaping. Installing a smart thermostat, a heat pump, or insulating an attic will reduce peak for its lifetime, potentially 15 or 20 years. And it can also be dispatched from a demand response standpoint during events, which is energy, a hedge against those peak events. And a virtual power plant is actually both. It's not just controlling a thermostat, or dispatching a battery. In fact, the bulk of the potential in a virtual power plant, just like the rest of the grid, is in what we think of as a baseload virtual power plant. The investment in infrastructure and buildings that produces long-term load shape impacts. And the advantage to those long-term effects is that they're deeper. You can only go so deep with controls, but replacing a heat pump and insulating an attic could have 30 or 40% peak reduction every summer peak day during those peak windows. And the other big piece is that you don't lose utility, and that's a different type of utility than like the energy utility, which is turning up your heat and running an air conditioner less during summer peak will help the grid, but you're sacrificing comfort. Whereas putting in a brand new high efficiency heat pump and insulating an attic, you get load reductions, but you actually improve comfort at the same time to the end customer. So it's those integration of the long-term effects and the dispatchability that is the virtual power plant. It's not just, your smart thermostat can reduce peak every day. That's your base load value, and can go even further during an emergency, for example. And so the grid is, as we all know, is like fundamentally changing. It's gone from this hub and spoke model I talked about, which is very predictable, right? Very controllable, to something that's much more complicated, and frankly, we're not talking about a smart thermostat. We're talking about Nest and Ecobee and Honeywell and Residio and Train and Carrier, and it goes on and on and on, right? And so it no longer, in this distributed model, really lends itself to this command and control structure or running RFPs and picking winners, right? There's Tesla batteries and Sunrun batteries and Enphase batteries and SunVerge batteries, and it just goes on and on and on. right? And so it's a much more complicated universe. It's a much more distributed universe. Now, decarbonization, which is what we're talking about here, largely, it's not just a coastal thing. I think this is, I have to keep going back and updating this map. Actually, this is a SEPA map because it changes so rapidly. But right now, 75% of US customers are being served by a utility with a 100% carbon goal of one way, shape, or form. And that's a huge driver. It's not just California and New York, right? It's really all over the country. And so getting to 100%, getting to 100% GHG free energy is a challenge because, again, what we're talking about there largely is stuff like solar and wind, and can also include nuclear. But frankly, we don't have to take a position on nuclear, but we're just not building any of it when it really comes right down to it. And the challenge with these resources is that they are intermittent, right? The sun has to be out, which is not coincidental actually with the peak load on our grid. That evening coincidental load where we have commercial and residential loads happens after the sun goes down. And then we have a lot of wind. And in California, our wind resource, we're working on some like offshore wind that could be more stable, but also doesn't tend to be well aligned with those peak demands that we're having as well. And so this is kind of a 2023 view of the duck curve. We're actually below zero. So you're all probably familiar with this, but we're over generating solar to such a large degree that we're actually turning off about 25% of our grid solar, curtailing it during the middle of the day, which is really painful from an economic standpoint. Like, you really want to run this stuff once you build it. And we're literally paying states like Arizona to take solar from us in the middle of the day. And then lo and behold, the sun goes down and we get this coincidental peak and everything has to ramp back up. So what we need to do is use this energy when it is cheap and plentiful. You can do that by charging your vehicle, pre-cooling your building, putting it in a battery. There's all sorts of running your industrial processes like in the middle of the day when we're flush with clean electrons. And we want to do everything we can to reduce the peak because this is really high GHG. 49% of the energy in California is being generated by natural gas, but it's a much higher percentage during this evening peak. And so it's actually coming down. That is storage. That's what we're looking at. The peak is shifting later in the evening. Right now, 8 and 9 p.m. are the actual system net peaks, moving more towards 9 and 10 p.m. in the future, which again is totally a function of the storage that we have on the grid. But anything that we can do to use it and store it and shift it when it's clean and plentiful, and we literally are paying folks to get, like, it costs us money. We don't know what to do with the solar we have on the grid today, and reducing these peak windows, which not only is running natural gas during the peak, but we end up having about half of our natural gas running through the middle of the day also, because you can't turn it off. You have to have it idling or at a low and ready to come back online for this peak. So only about half, we're only reducing our natural gas generation in the middle of the day by 50%. And we are literally paying people to take solar from us. Very inefficient. So real quick on Recurve, like, we're two things. I won't get too much into like really the company, but one is we provide analytics. We ingest meter data, which we can work with folks like MCE or aggregators, or frankly, the Energy Commission in California, the client of ours, to figure out what really is going on in the grid. GHGs are totally time dependent. Again, middle of the day, 0 GHGs, peak period, very high GHGs, winter, very high GHGs, nighttime, very high GHGs. It really matters when and where you're using energy. There's no just constant. So be able to do the analytics to understand, where are those GHGs coming from? Which customers have crappy air conditioners? Literally which ones? And how do you forecast the effects of a virtual power plant so you can integrate it into the grid? And into the forecast so you can actually be counted. And then the second part of our model is, once you know that there's a peak problem and what it's worth to solve, enabling what we call a flex market, which is a marketplace for virtual power plants where we can engage all of the innovative firms that are out there. Recurve, we think of ourselves, we're not a virtual power plant, we're a platform. We enable companies like MCE or PG&E or other CCAs or retailers or munis around the country to pay for the grid value that's being created when a company like Ecobee or companies like Taper Solutions that are out retrofitting, Albertson grocery stores and Lowe's and other things, sending a price signal that pays for that benefit that is created when they shift energy to the grid and on an equivalent basis to a power plant. And moving from kind of the traditional, we're going to run an RFP and pick which vendor we're going to use, to much more of an open market where utilities can engage all of the different companies that are innovating on business models for customers. And there's a lot of them. We currently work with about 170 different companies here in California that have different solutions for different customers. And the focus is on what do those solutions do? Not are we going to determine if we think in advance your solution is a good answer. But can you get customers to adopt, and does it deliver results at the meter that we can measure? So our platform itself, one is being able to look at all these meters on the grid and identify what is the potential for virtual power plant, which customers are actual good candidates, and what would the effects be. And then once one goes out, for example, to say like, all right, well, here's the 10% of customers that could really use a heat pump, for example, being able to install those heat pumps and measure the impact. And the challenge with flexibility in general that Bob mentioned and Jigger talks about as well sometimes is that if you don't have a product, you can't actually create a market, and you can't really integrate these solutions. So the challenge with flexibility in general, whether it's energy efficiency or demand response or the combination of the two, in the way that we think about it is when you change a building, you have nothing left to measure against. So you actually have to create and calculate a counterfactual. And being able to do that in an open, transparent way is kind of Reeker's special sauce on this stuff. We've been working for over a decade on developing methods and mathematics that are totally transparent and open source to everybody. Anybody can use them. No one can secretly own the weights and measures, right? What a kilowatt hour is for a flexibility power plant. So being able to track those, for example, heat pumps, we help implement the tech program in California. So every heat pump that goes in for the statewide Clean Heat California program, we're measuring, for example, and Fleet Manager lets us do that. And then be able to convert those customers in a portfolio into the value to the grid and also through bill savings. And that's what we call a ledger, which is if you have 10,000 customers that adopted smart thermostats, what was the effect on the grid from those smart thermostats or heat pumps? And what is that worth? So that we can quantify and enable utilities to pay for these virtual power plants, just like they're a real power plant. Just to give you a sense of the kind of real quick, for example, on the resource planning exercise, which again, we're doing for folks like MCE, but also we actually work for, I think there's 12 CCAs now that have Resource Planner up and running. We also provide this statewide to the Energy Commission to answer questions like, every 6 years they do an appliance survey and they get general statistics on who has resistance electric heat, for example, and who has, a gas furnace. And we're able to replace that now with analytics, where instead of, spending millions of dollars on surveys and, asking customers to respond to polls, we can just measure it. And not only can we say, here are how many people have electric resistance heat, but here are the actual addresses on the map that you should talk to that actually have, here are the specific people that have those electric resistance heats, for example. So being able to take that data, utilize the kind of general AMI to target, for example, in this case, who are the customers that have, 37% of their energy going to air conditioning instead of 11%. If you're going to insulate an attic or put in a smart thermostat to reduce peak, these 37% of the customers, or these customers in the targeted group that have 37% air conditioning have vastly bigger impacts to the grid, and we can know who they are in advance. And for example, how we put that to work, this is a project we did with SoCal Edison recently for their low income electrification program. And again, looking at their broad customer base and identifying, here are the customers that have twice the air conditioner of your average customer. Go there first. They're going to have drastically bigger bill savings. They're going to pencil. It's much more important for low income, especially with electrification, because most low income customers, by a huge margin, by the way, it's not 51%, it's like 80%, will actually see bill increases right now going with a heat pump. So being able to identify where are you going to actually see grid benefits and which customers are going to see bill savings. And we can know this in advance. So providing SCE this telemetry, here are the 16,852 customers that use twice the air conditioners. They have twice the air conditioning load as the average. Go engage those customers first. They will save on their bills and they will be good for the grid. Start there. And just to give a sense, we do this in other states as well. This is ComEd, and you can just see again, the green is our targeted customer base. This is looking at an existing program, and you can more than double the results for these customers by looking for the ones that have high potential to have the outcomes for these different programs. So a lot that we can do with smart meter data that is available that we traditionally have never done before, right? We're kind of flying blind. That's something for y'all to think about is equity and equality. We talk about, we kind of mistake the two for each other pretty regularly, where we say everybody should get a heat pump. That's fair. We have a slightly different version, which is we think that's equality, but not equity. We think equity is putting people into solutions that are going to work for them. And so that we should be identifying which customers are going to actually save money on their bills and be good for the grid. And we should go to those customers first for things like heat pumps. For ComEd in Illinois as well, they have a peak reduction goal, and it turns out if there's 25%, peak is where all the GHGs are, and 25% of their customers have like nearly 10x the peak reduction as the other 75%. And we know who they are. Start there. You'll have vastly bigger GHG impacts. And it's really important because we don't have endless money. So we need to use the money that we are investing in decarbonization as wisely as possible. And that means we have to focus on where it's going to have the largest effect. Now, this isn't even an up-to-date map. I was just realizing, because it's gotten worse. It's actually the Northeast is now orange also. But the power outages we've been experiencing here in California, and the stuff we hear about in Texas, that still gets headlines. But as we were decarbonizing, the North American grids are just getting less and less stable. And frankly, the middle of the country, MISO, has the biggest imbalance between supply and demand in the whole country right now. And so when we talk about virtual power plants and flexibility, this is the business we're in, which is using flexibility and demand and getting customers to take action that can improve their buildings and whatnot, but can ultimately shift their load to align it more closely with when there is available electricity, and especially when it's clean and renewable. That's the job of virtual power plant. And so solving this imbalance problem that's only getting worse every year, and frankly faster than anyone's forecasting it. The important part of what virtual power plants enable us to do is to not just keep building more grid side resources, but to also invest in customers and how customers use energy to, again, balance the grid. And that manifests, for example, this is from 2020, but 2021 was another challenging year that we just barely skated through. This year's we have El Nino, it's going to be really hot, but we have a lot of water. So we'll see how the summer plays out. It's a little different. But actually working initially with MCE, but then building on that, we did a bunch of work initially with MCEs, working with OhmConnect, you guys probably know, to really work and working with the national labs to kind of prove methods to more accurately measure the effects of demand response and energy efficiency together. These two things, again, are two sides of the same coin, not different. And based on it, the CAISO reached out to us because they were having these issues where, 2020 happened. The demand response did not perform very well, but they want more of it. But they frankly came to us and said, we want more demand response, but we're not so sure it's actually working, which turned out to be sort of true. But there's a ton of opportunity there. And their fundamental issue is if we don't trust that the measurement is right, we can't really take advantage of it. We're not going to be able to rely on it. So they worked with us to develop some methods that, again, started with MCE and OhmConnect. And originally, they were our first partners on this, that enable us to, again, and this is kind of what Recurve does at its core, measure both energy efficiency and demand response. And so this is an example of a portfolio. This is actually smart thermostats in Southern California that you're looking at. I can't divulge who exactly. But you can see what we do. The red is what Recurve's algorithms, our open source tools, are calculating as the baseline. That's what would have happened if it wasn't for the event that was called during this peak period. And blue is what's actually happening from the consumption standpoint for the treated customers that were actually responding to this event in Southern California. And the flexibility is the gap between the two. That's demand response. Now, and you can see they probably could have done some pre-cooling, they didn't. But you can see a really significant drop in demand during the period that they're getting paid to turn their thermostat temperatures up or shut them off. And then, a jump afterwards as they're recovering, right? They're catching back up again. And that delta, that's demand response. And again, from a Recurve standpoint, what's kind of unique and important is this ability to not just pay for events. If we have a smart thermostat, what we really want is that smart thermostat to shave peak every day and then maximize it during an event day. And that's kind of a unique aspect that Recurve brings to the table, is this ability to measure what did that thermostat do every day, and then create a new baseline that says, what was the additional effect because today's an emergency, and pay for that accordingly, so that we're paying for both those long-term values, that baseload VPP, and the peaker VPP, which is the dispatch. So I guess that's just one important thing is like, again, we talk a lot, like there's a kind of, we think it's just incorrect. Like, again, mostly a lot of what's being talked about as virtual power plants is like stuff that you can control and dispatch. And again, we actually think that's a very small percentage of the potential. And in a perfect world, actually, which is not anything we'll ever achieve, you know, the perfect world is you maximize the usage of the virtual power plant every day, which means in a perfect world, there would be no demand response left. There's nothing extra to give during an event. That will never happen because none of us will let, you know, our smart thermostat vendor make us that uncomfortable every day. But demand response at actually event-driven dispatch is a result of an inefficiency in the market itself. So it's really important that we pay for both of these attributes. Because like I said, if you look at the grid overall, peak is like the peak response. And when I say peak on the grid, I mean like, you know, diesel generators firing up during emergencies is a really small amount. That's DR. The bulk of it is stuff like wind, solar, nuclear, and hydro, stuff that is really baseload, what we would consider baseload or load following, not peak dispatch. And again, very much the same thing. So we were just, you know, in 2020, we started doing this work with our friends at MCE and deployed what we call a flex market, which I'll describe in a second. And then you know, we had just, and this is coming right on the back of those blackouts in 2020. And, you know, flex market, which I'll get into, paying aggregators for the value to the grid that they're providing and letting them figure out how to get customers to engage and what they're going to actually do. But the governor in the summer of 2021 put out an emergency proclamation, a grid reliability emergency. And he actually asked all agencies to come up with solutions to how do we balance the grid. We need, and frankly, just so you all, from a carbon standpoint, we've been building natural gas and even firing diesel generators like mad the last few years. It's not clean. This, like, keeping the lights on is really important politically and in reality, but it ain't clean what we're doing. We're buying natural gas as like generation as fast as we possibly can in California right now. So part of this went to the Public Utilities Commission, and based on the work explicitly that we did with MCE, with Flex Market, frankly, much to our surprise, they adopted a resolution that said we're going to put $150 million into a statewide flex market solution through the IOUs and MCE. And unfortunately, they boxed the rest of the CCAs out, which we're trying to make up the difference on that right now, because we think flexibility in particular makes a hell of a lot of sense that CCAs are on the front lines of that. I mean, it's individual customers in communities. And last I checked, community is in the CCA's name. So it makes a heck of a lot of sense that our community choice aggregators are part of the solution. But the focus, so the focus for this program that the PUC created, which they call market access, but very specifically, it's a generic name for flex market, is saying, look, what we're focused on is paying for 4 to 9 p.m., June to September savings, with 7 to 9 p.m. being the most important hours. And the flex market, again, different from kind of a traditional efficiency program where you might run an RFP and pick somebody and say, all right, we're going to work with Ecobee or whatever. Instead says, look, we're going to work with aggregators. And so in flex market, again, Recurve and the flex market itself is just a platform. We make it really easy for companies to engage. They sign a flexibility purchase agreement. They take the performance risk. You know, they don't get paid up front. They get paid for what they deliver. And because we're measuring and paying for outcomes, we don't need a whole hell of a lot of rules, right? We don't have to have a 200-page rule book micromanaging everything, because the aggregators are the ones taking on the performance risk. So these aggregators are free to figure out what types of solutions do they deliver to customers, how do they package that up, how do they sell it, and how do they balance the customer benefits and the grid benefits? It ain't just one or the other, right? You can't just maximize the grid. You gotta also not piss off your customers. Then Recurve measures the impact to the load shape that's coming from both the long-term and dispatchable events, and values and when you think about it, when you retrofit a building, you put a smart thermostat, you put in a heat pump, there's customers save on their bills. They might be more comfortable. There's those sorts of benefits. Those are customer benefits that they're going to pay for. But greenhouse gases, transmission distribution, energy capacity, those are grid benefits, not accruing to the customer. And that's the virtual power plant. And so we enable the utility of the CCA or the muni or the retailer to pay for those virtual power plants, the aggregation of those projects, you know, like a regular power plant, and align the incentives. So the aggregators, you know, incentive, the way they make the most money is coming up with solutions customers actually like, and maximizing both the customer and the grid benefits in the process. And again, aligning the incentives. So the more grid benefit they can figure out how to deliver, the more money they're going to make. And currently there's about 160 aggregators. This is a partial list. You go to demandflexmarket.com and see a full list, but it's both resi and commercial. But it's everybody from folks like Franklin and ClearResult that implement utility programs to OhmConnect and Ecobee to a whole bunch of commercial companies you may or may not have heard of that are doing refrigeration systems and lighting retrofits and all sorts of stuff in different types of buildings for different types of customers. And it's encouraged and it's enabling this kind of competition that is really critical. It's not a utility picking the winner and telling everybody what they're going to do. It's really enabling the market to innovate on the solutions that we need to scale. And this is an example from a market access standpoint. This is looking at an HVAC, commercial HVAC system, but what it's actually worth for the lifetime benefit. If you retrofit an HVAC system, you're actually getting a 15-year average life for that retrofit. And again, you can additionally dispatch during these peaks, but fixing an air conditioner and insulating an attic, that will shave peak for the next 15, 20 years in most cases, while also improving the comfort of the occupant of the building, which is, again, unique to this. Whereas, on the supply side, no customer gets a benefit. And demand response is great, but again, you're giving something up to participate in demand response. That's important too, from an equity standpoint. There's actually a bunch of chit chat how like, oh, demand response is great for low-income customers because they love it, which is true. Like they need the money, so they do it. But from a real equity standpoint, it's much more equitable to improve their building, because what we're really saying to them is, you need the money, so give up the comfort, be uncomfortable, and we'll pay you for it. And that's not really equity, right? It's might be true that they're willing to participate, but it's because they're giving something up in the process. So, I think Alex will get into more of this as well, but one of the things that we are doing with MCE, which is both long-term load flexibility and also peak impact. And again, it's really important that we do both of these things together. Demand response and energy efficiency are not different, they're the same. And almost everything that we see out there has both effects, right? A smart thermostat will reduce peak every day a little bit, and then will maximize the result during an event. And in reality, demand response is really just the additional impact you would get during that event. It's not what did you do, what did you do extra? That's the demand response impact. So it's really this ability to integrate those, both the EE and DR. They've been historically in silos. And that's really problematic because if you're just doing demand response, you have a disincentive to reduce peak every other day, even if it saves GHGs, is good for the grid, because it actually reduces your baseline and the amount of demand response you can deploy. And so you really want these things to be integrated, because we want the incentive to be maximizing the effects on the grid and the GHG reductions all the time, not waiting around for the most valuable events and then firing. So we deployed this, with MCE and with PG&E. The Southern California utilities went off and tried to deploy market access themselves. If you look at the numbers today, they spent more on admin than they've delivered in projects, unfortunately. But with MCE and PG&E, we have these are preliminary numbers, actually going to come out. They're going to change slightly because we've just been updating them, but we're going to be coming out with a bunch of communications later this week. But what's really interesting is focusing on commercial primarily, not entirely, but primarily, essentially just recurve, just with MCE and PG&E, we've added 40% to the total systems benefit for commercial programs for the entire state in 7 months total at this point, which is pretty incredible when you think about it. That's across the entire state, 41% increase in grid benefits, just for market access, just from recurve, just with PG&E and MCE. And for every megawatt hour we delivered, those megawatt hours are delivering twice the grid benefits. That means 2x the capacity, energy, T&D, and GHG reductions as the traditional efficiency portfolio. And we're doing that across 37 participating aggregators at this point. Not only that, we're currently at 92% of the forecast being realized, and we're actually expecting to go above 100% for the summer, which means by the end of the summer, we're pretty dang sure we're going to actually be delivering more than was forecasted, which is very unique because typical programs underperform almost all the time. So pretty exciting results. And PG&E is kind of a big player, but we're also working with MCE rather explicitly, but also Sonoma Clean Power has a resi and commercial program with us. We work with Peninsula Clean Energy. We're doing a hard to reach, low income, I guess low income is probably the wrong word, hard to reach small business program focusing on like corner stores and stuff in the Bay Ren district. And also a bunch of work in Southern California and low income electrification primarily. I'll actually skip. I have a little video we can go back to just hearing from some aggregators, but I'm going to spare you guys at this point. So we do think, and I guess this is important, in general, CCAs, we think increasingly should be where virtual power plants and flexibility lives. Maybe not exclusively, but definitely they should be in the game, particularly because they're in the community. And when you start talking about virtual power plants, you're talking about people in buildings that live in communities, not big power plants anymore. And Recurve, we're working right now. We have, I guess, 12 CCAs that are on our platform in addition to the IOUs. MCE kind of being our interesting. How did MCE knock in on this list? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I lost something in translation. Sorry. And then I just want to touch on, like I said, touch on a couple of key things. There's a lot of focus on electrification. It's critical to decarbonization. So this is an example of, what heat pumps actually do. And this is one of the challenging things, like, the grid is complicated and decarbonization is very complicated. So one of the challenges we have is that on average across the state of California, installing a heat pump does not reduce GHGs. It actually increases them for the life right now. Now, as we eventually get to zero GHG supply, that will reverse itself. But the challenge is that heat pumps create new demand in the winter morning. And we don't have a good solution anywhere yet to get clean electrons into the morning in the winter. And so heat pumps today, when you do the math, will actually net increase GHGs during their lifetime because we're shifting off of natural gas, but we're creating this really large new load during the winter mornings. And so it's a pretty challenging, equation to make work. And we don't have a lot of great resource in California that gets us clean electrons at 6 in the morning in the winter. Again, offshore wind can help, but we're kind of talking about solar plus storage, which is crazy expensive. So it's really challenging, right? Like we got to think it's not, there is no such thing as like kilowatt hour, GHG per megawatt hour. It varies by hour really dramatically. And again, electrification is great, but we're building load in some of the hardest hours of the year when we're doing it. But interestingly, working in this case with a company called Franklin Energy, this is a PG&E program, they targeted the customers that are, first of all, the magic quotient is you're looking for customers that have really bad air conditioning and don't use a lot of heating, right? And so they focused on, in this case, the Central Valley, and they focused on customers with really bad air conditioners. And in so doing, they were able to generate 20% peak reductions. And so even though they're increasing kilowatt hours on the grid in general by moving from gas to electric, obviously, about, in this case, 43% of the gas load is going away, which is about the system average for the whole country, state, in terms of how much energy goes into heating. So you're putting all that gas energy into electricity. And in California, 70% of our energy is gas, 30% is electricity right now. It's mostly gas. There's a lot of embodied energy in gas. And so what's interesting is we're increasing kilowatt hours, but we are actually producing a grid benefit. And that's because we're reducing the summer peak and focusing on folks with air conditioners. If you add a heat pump and you're adding air conditioner, it never reduces GHGs and it increases customer costs every single time. And so it's really important to identify the right customers because, again, with the price of energy in California, 34 cents off peak for the most part, electrification is not easy to pencil. You got to be really careful where you do it. We co-implement the tech program, and part of what we're doing there is the statewide electrification, which is the Clean Heat California Tech program. I don't even know what tech stands for anymore, but it's supposed to save energy, save customers money, not just electrify, and that's a challenging equation. Like it's really especially in coastal climate zones, not true for most people. And that's something we have to be very careful of, especially in low income, right? It's one thing when us, rich Marinites increase our energy bills, but if you go into a low income household and give them a heat pump and you give them an air conditioner at the same time, and all of a sudden they have extra $100 cost in the summer, that can be really detrimental. So we have to do no harm. And a lot we can solve that by knowing which customers are going to have good outcomes to begin with. And I'll kind of leave it at this, but that's some of the work that we've been doing also with our friends at MCE, which is there is a residential component to the work that we're doing with MCE. It's been challenging though, because MCE's territory is a lot Marin and folks that aren't places that aren't that hot. Not entirely, right? It's also Concord and San Rafael and lots of other places, or San Ramon and places that are hot. But if you do heat pumps on average across all of the residential customers, they don't really pencil, because we're doing adding a lot of air conditioning in places here like Mill Valley, right? And places that don't have high AC load to begin with and don't even have high AC penetration. So what's interesting is you can't really run the economics if you do it on average, but there's at least 15% of the customers that we can identify in advance that aren't worth $600, they're worth $4,000 to the grid. And they will save. And these are the customers largely in climate zone 12, Concord, San Ramon, place, some parts of Napa, for example, where it's really hot, where that heat pump is, at a specific, is not just moving the natural gas over to electricity, but is also replacing a crappy air conditioner with a much better one. And so that ability to target the right customers is super critical, right? Or it just really doesn't pencil, not just for the grid, but also for the customers, fundamentally. So we're kind of excited that now, it's been hard to get off this residential work with MC has been challenging because of these fundamental economics, but now that we're working with MC and able to identify and target the right customers, we can make it work. But that's one of the critical components when you guys think about this from a policy standpoint is equity versus equality. We just, we doing the same thing for everybody isn't really equitable. We frankly don't have enough money to give everybody the same solution. We have to identify what solutions are going to work for which different customers and prioritize. So that's the end of my song and dance. I appreciate, sorry, I kind of went a little long here, but I'd be happy to take any questions. And I think Alex will jump in a bit and we can kind of follow up after he does his part as well.
Good. Thanks so much, Matt. We have some questions in chat. I want to start first with Dan. I know that you very likely have some questions for Matt.
Hey, Matt, that was a great presentation. Thank you very much. Great overview. For people who may not be as familiar with this, Matt really has innovated here in terms of measuring how you, in effect, figure out a control group. So you actually get a measurement of savings, standardized it, made it open source. That's kind of what's enabled this whole thing to go forward, and this whole concept of a marketplace that he's provided where anyone can kind of play and plug into, is really providing the acceleration for this whole effort. So a lot of kudos to Matt for his contributions in this area. Thank you. I guess one question is this whole targeting point, which is absolutely critical in terms of how energy is used, getting the right customers. It's going to drive the customer savings. It's going to drive the greenhouse gas savings. How far can you use that data? What are kind of the limits? Like when you work with MCE, I guess you can identify some of MCE's own customers and target them for products and services, but can you go to an aggregator and help them? Or I'm just kind of curious how far this can be extended, or whether there's some kind of hard limits, that you can't cross and people you can't share with.
Yeah, I mean, this is PII information, so we definitely have to be very careful with it. At the same time, there's always a balance that you have to, like, at one level, you could say sharing the load shape of residential customers in California on average actually impinges on each of your personal information ever so slightly. And on the other hand, sharing your AMI is like a full invasion. So we need to make smart choices that balance the fact that we've invested billions of dollars in smart meters and are fighting climate change and the benefits of targeting to customers with the realistic, invasion of privacy and what that's worth, and make policy decisions around that. It can't just be a binary yes or no. So a couple of things. One is you don't need to know individual. We don't share AMI data with anybody. So what we are sharing is here's a bucket of the 40,000 customers for this particular CCA that are in the top 20% for a heat pump. And kind of the privacy principle behind that is, something about that bucket of 40,000 customers, but the same thing about all of them, right? And so it's a lot less sensitive. And then there's a question of how do you share it? So, in some cases and under the right NDAs for the right aggregators, there can be an opportunity to send, like working as essentially an agent of the program. And this is very typical, that we can potentially share lists and say, here's the 2,000 customer doors to knock on. And that's, again, already something that's happening with like program implementation from a program purpose standpoint. The more kind of egalitarian approach where we actually go the other way, which is, aggregators get a customer, they put in their customer's SAID, their identification number, and we say, look, this customer is eligible. And by the way, did you know they're in the top 10%? Or you can give them a $2,000 incentive, not a $500 incentive. So there's that balance. And we also have some tools, we have something called differential privacy that we developed also with like the Energy Commission here in California, which is a really advanced technique where we inject random noise into these portfolios. So you might say, here's the 10,000 customers that have the most demand for electrification. But some of them are made up and you don't know who. And that's the idea behind differential privacy, is injecting that noise. So you never know precisely if someone you're looking at is actually in the portfolio or are they just noise. So there's some tools out there. But interestingly, there's been a lot of resistance to sharing customer data, especially from the IOUs. And the PUC just overrode them and said, no, for customer targeting and measurement and these use cases, you're required to provide not only treated customers, but population customer data in a disaggregated form. And that's just this function of, again, public purpose versus, balancing the realistic risk in what we're sharing.
Yeah, great. I wonder also if you could give an overview of the funding, because it is striking that, your comments that, hey, this is all the same thing. It's just where and when are you reducing loads? So energy, it's all the same coin, it's just different timeframes and places. But the funding source is my understanding, and this is in the chat in one of the questions, someone's alluding to all these different programs, the Flex Market, the ELRP, this is Angela. So I'm wondering if you could just comment on as much as you would.
That is a hot mess. And it's very poorly coordinated, and there's not a lot of overarching thought. It's very reactive. So there's a couple of things there. One is, like, traditionally we have paid for this stuff through ratepayer surcharges. It's a tax on ratepayers, and it's been very programmatic in how it's been deployed, and very disconnected from things like procurement and forecasting. It's really been like a coupon campaign to make customers happy. We can call it a resource all day long, but that's where it comes from. So one big transition is, moving from using ratepayer surcharge dollars, and this is not we're not trying to do this overnight, but to looking at the value of flexibility as a hedging mechanism and saying, we should be paying for virtual power plants out of procurement, and the utilities should be required to invest in the measurable demand flexibility whenever it's available before supply side resources, because it also helps customers. And ratepayer funds, again, are a pretty inefficient proxy. The real benefit to a utility is if I install a bunch of insulation and smart thermostats and reduce my peak, I can reduce my need to buy resource adequacy, long-term capacity costs, by changing my load shape. That's what efficiency is. It's a hedge on long-term capacity costs. And if I can also signal, Ecobee and Nest and everybody else to, get their customers to reduce demand as much as possible during an emergency event, what am I doing? I'm hedging my need to buy $2,000 megawatts off the Kyson. And so the long-term strategy and funding should be coming out of the same procurement budgets that we would otherwise be using to buy more expensive supply side resources. That's what it is. It's all a big hedge. So we see we'd like to see a transition. And frankly, efficiency came from low-income weatherization. That's kind of why it's weird. Is it's like we said, hey, we're going to help poor people through a social benefit program, and then could we scale this up to everybody? That's how it went. And so, frankly, what I'd like to see is, over time, all of the ratepayer surcharge money going into equity programs and the resource value moving officially over to the same bucket of funding as the supply side. And I think we'll see a lot more harmonization as well. Frankly, I don't know how many more cycles between us chickens here, but I think there is a central data platform in the state of California that we're able to tap into for things like tech. We really do think there should be one clearinghouse where we're measuring both the EE and the DR in a consistent way. And if what we're paying for is what's in California these days is called total systems benefit, TSB, which is the avoided cost value to the grid, like we really don't need that. It's really inefficient to have that replicated everywhere and have all these competing programs. That really should just be a statewide platform, in my opinion. So we'll see how that goes, but that's where I think it'll move over the longer haul. But that's kind of the big idea is like we want, and that's we want virtual power plants to work just like regular power plants. But there's a lot of hurdles that we have to overcome in the process. And some of it's already happening. Like there's a energy efficiency proposed decision that the PUC has out there right now. So a couple of big changes in California. One, in February, the PUC said there is no such thing as a goal of a megawatt hour reduction anymore. It is all total systems benefit, which is the hourly avoided cost to the grid. That transition happened. They also, in that same ruling, said the utilities are required to cough up the data. And then this proposed decision that's out right now actually flips the whole system and says default, if this goes through, it's still proposed, but default for all energy efficiency programs is population NMEC pay for performance, which is flex market fundamentally. It's also like that same idea. And if you want to do a deemed program where you give, average rebates or a custom program, you have to actually demonstrate that you can't do it through a meter-based approach. So they're completely inverting it, which is a long time coming.
Yeah. And just to clarify for people who may not have heard the term, population NMEC is basically the methodology to measure what the actual savings are. Is that fair?
Yeah, I can thank Carmen on my team for when she was at the PUC for inventing the word NMEC. It's normalized metered energy consumption jargon. What it really means is using meters to measure. Like it turns out we have smart meter data. We have standard measurement methods. And so saying the big innovation was, historically, like we do studies and come up with averages and no one really measured anything, and saying, we can measure and pay for the results like a grown-up. That's how everything works. Just energy efficiency didn't used to work that way. And that's, again, kind of from its origin story. There's really nothing very innovative in what we're doing. Like Recurve was going, oh, you guys are so innovative. We're really just copying how every other market works, literally, and not figuratively. Like I did a bunch of work in solar securitization and whatnot. We're just trying to do the same thing. It's really, we're bringing like normalcy to the demand side. It's not, we're not trying to innovate a lot. We're trying to make it the same.
Well, let's hit, thanks for that. Let's hit some of the questions in the chat. I'll direct you there. I don't know whether I should read them, but David Rempel has basically a question about TOU plans and what effect they could have. Yeah, so time use is great. It just has to be sort of simple. I mean, my background is retrofitting residential buildings, and like customers don't have any idea what's going on in their building. They're like, it's kind of like, I kind of, when you talk about like complicated rates or real-time rates, which is some of the direction that we're going, and some of it is so complicated. I equate it to like, you want health insurance and a doctor, or if you get sick, do you want me to mail you a medical device catalog? Right? Like, so time use rates are great, but in my opinion, having worked with lots of customers, they have to be pretty straightforward and simple and can't be too aggressive, because you end up with all these edge cases, like people who are sick and they can't actually turn their air conditioner off or whatever, getting hammered by these rates. So there's real equity issues you have to think about. So, we think reasonable time of use makes sense. When we do our measurement, the time of use effects are in the baseline. So it actually, like, we're measuring the additional effect of a wholesale signal. And I really do think that some basic smart time of use, and right now our time of use is not very smart. It's the differential is so small. If you actually think about it, it's not worth paying attention to. And the hours are not lined up with the grid. We're actually, the time of use hours are not actually when we need them, because it's a laggard. But we think like you should have a smart time of use rate structure that is simple. And then we should have a very aggressive wholesale signal so that we can enable these companies to intermediate that signal and make it simple for the customer and absorb the risk. We don't want every customer to be an energy trader. They're just not tooled up to do it. Now, interestingly, if you guys are, there's some really crazy stuff going on, and I mean crazy, like in my opinion anyways, there's this fixed charge proposal that's going on. You guys are tracking that, where they're actually proposing that there's an income gradiated fixed charge, which means essentially for PG&E customers, and the question just came up actually, because like our friends at like MCE can have more control of their own rates. So I don't know how this translates to CCAs, by the way. Literally we're just talking about this yesterday and I don't have an answer, but maybe Alex does. But what they're talking about is a fixed fee of like essentially if your low income will be $15 a month,
If you're middle income, it'll be like $35 a month. And if you're high income, it would be like $95, $96 a month in PG&E territory fixed. And that means your rates would go down by about a third, but you'd have this like every month fixed grid fee that you'd have to pay. It's actually a misnomer. It's not fixed, it's required because it's variable. So so it's interesting. The challenge there is that the idea is to encourage electrification, but what it really encourages is just consumption, which happens to also encourage electrification, but it guts the incentive to do things like demand response storage, EE, or anything, because the more you move to a fixed rate, the less reducing energy consumption is going to affect your bill. And so it's a really interesting, in an academic, kind of in the Chinese proverb version of interesting times, it's a really complicated head scratcher of a policy, which I'm personally not in favor of. I think there's other ways to help low-income customers than having to report your income to the utility. And I think this moving a third of the value to a fixed fee works against California's leadership on the demand side for the last 30 years plus, and is going to have a really negative impact.
Yeah, great point on the effect on the variable rate coming down and making energy cheaper on the margin. Ray asks about the kind of longer term load reduction measures, how that affects baseline and how that, how those measures are saved. You can see the question there. You alluded to that, but I think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't really know I'm not sure exactly what the overpay scenario. So, one level, this kind of, I'm not sure I want to dive into the mathematics on this just because it'll get kind of nerdy kind of quick, but so we're doing, the way we're kind of harmonizing these signals is multiple baselines. So let's just take a smart thermostat. Like, we'll first create a baseline on how you consume energy prior to having a smart thermostat. And when we say baseline, what we're doing is looking at your consumption and creating a mathematical model that predicts how you use energy. And it's surprising how accurate we are actually on individuals, but then as you roll up into a portfolio, it's incredibly predictive. And then when there are events, what we're doing is creating a secondary baseline, which is essentially when there's an emergency event, we look at how you use energy 60 days prior to the event, masking event windows, anytime you had responded in that, and create a secondary baseline that says, here's how you use energy with a smart thermostat. And so during an event, what it allows us to do is break up the savings and say, well, today you saved 12 kilowatts this hour. Normally you would have saved 5. So 5 of it is long-term value, and that additional 7, that's your demand response. And so it's able to attribute it properly and not double count is actually what it results in. There's definitely some more to it, but that's kind of how it works.
Now, okay, thanks for that. Angela's question here. This is the hot mess you referred to. Maybe in addressing that, you can just give us an idea where most of the money's coming from and through what agencies and how the money's flowing.
So there is this idea of a bifurcation, which is we can clear trade. You can either be energy resource adequacy and demand response could either be bid into the CAISO, or it could be deployed as a virtual power plant by a utility to hedge exposure to the CAISO. And again, the challenge is like, it doesn't fit super nice in the supply side market. Like if I do demand response with my Ohm Connect, I got my Ohm Connect stuff going, right? So if I do DR for Ohm Connect and they sell it to SoCal Edison in the CAISO, here's the challenge. I changed my load shape and I'm an MCE customer. I'm not in Southern California. And MCE is buying capacity to cover my forecasted demand, but now my demand's lower. And like, I am not physically anywhere else but here. And so it just literally doesn't fit very nice. So that's some of the hot mess, right? You can be on one side or the other. You can't be on both. That's the key thing. We can work on either side when it comes down to it. We have somewhat of an opinion that there's a challenge on the VPP side because like there's a lot of utilities, but it fits nicer. And so if you're bid into ELRP, we wouldn't pay for we would actually say your additional impact from ELRP, we're not going to pay for because you're already getting paid for, but we can pay for the long-term effect because ELRP doesn't pay for that. And that's the ability to kind of break the things apart. The challenging thing with ELRP is, I mean, it was pretty much a blunt force instrument. And interestingly, no one's really talking about this, but the M&D came back after the fact. And because the methods for measurement are pretty shoddy currently, for example, they drafted like all the low-income customers into ELRP, and they actually, for the most part, saved nothing. But we paid them because the first measurement was, did you reduce? And the answer was yes, so we paid them. Then they went back and did a comparison group and they realized, oh shit, everybody's reducing. Turns out the ELRP signal did nothing. They would have reduced anyways, and we just like vastly overpaid for ELRP for most categories. All the people that were defaulted in pretty much, folks that actively engaged and, enrolled themselves, on those customers did deliver. But the categories of customers that we said, like all low income customers on a care plan are going to be in ELRP, did not deliver anything to the grid, because really what looked like savings was just the fact that there are flex alerts on the radio and all of that. But you're definitely hitting on a point that like it's a hot mess out there. And we think that they're just really, we should be measuring and paying and quantifying and forecasting in one consistent way. And you can have different ways to engage customers, but like there should be a common platform for all of it.
Bob, I don't know how we're doing on time. I mean, Bill, there's one, I'll let you judge this. Let's address, cut me off whenever, but Bill Carney is asking, you see that question there, Matt, from Bill about is there downside to transitioning totally heat pump HVAC for all customers, and refers to the Backman model. And
yeah, there definitely is. And, this is, we definitely need to, the downside is heat pumps. If you transition right now in California, everybody to a heat pump, there'd be a massive increase in consumer spending on energy, and it would have a negative effect on the grid, because you'd be shifting a ton of heating load onto the electric grid in hours that are very high GHG, and you'd be adding a ton of air conditioning, which means adding a lot of summer peak load, which is the dirtiest time of the whole year. So I'm actually just pulling up. We did a study on this with the tech program. Actually, here I'll paste a link in. And this is the challenge. Like, we love heat pumps too. I have a heat pump personally. It made my bills go up a lot, but I'm happy. But it's actually, especially in low income, it's a very small number of people who are going to have positive grid impacts and save money by putting in a heat pump right now. So we need to be somewhat selective. It's especially true. For example, I just put in a heat pump water heater for my mom in San Rafael when it went out, and it doesn't save money flat out, but it costs a lot more. So it's unfortunate. I want to we're pro heat pump and we want to decarbonize, but it's not that clear of the more you get into the numbers on what it's actually doing and rates and GHGs on the grid, it's not the simple home run it looks like on the outset. You have to be really selective on how you do it. Now, over time, as we do clean up the supply mix, and as we do things to affect the price of energy, that can change. But it's not the clear home run for every customer right now that one would hope it would be, or that some of the advocates put out there. There's a lot of advocacy math which is very optimistic. It tends, so you talk to like the Rewire folks and whatnot, you look at their numbers, they're essentially estimating the cost is like half of what it actually is. Like the average HVAC heat pump system for clean tech, I just saw it yesterday, is $18,600, not $9,000 or $10,000. It's $18,600. And again, here in California and other places like New York that are trying to lead on heat pumps, our off peak, look at your bills, 34 cents a kilowatt hour. So when you do the math, just the simple math, like heat pumps might be 3 or 3.5 times more efficient at using electricity than resistance, but that electricity often costs 4 times more. And that was the challenge with my mom's heat pump in San Rafael, which was at a COP at 3.7, it's essentially scratch with their natural gas water heater that I replaced, but it cost $6,500 instead of what would have been $1,800 to replace, but it doesn't save money. And that's just like, so that's what we're trying to address with like the income, the fixed fee stuff, but it's challenging. That's all I'm trying to say. We're all pulling the same direction. It's just the math isn't that easy.
Hey, Bob, how are we doing on time? How do you want to handle?
Yeah, feel free to knock me out here and hand it over to Alex whenever you want. I can just keep talking.
Yeah. Well, let's have a couple of more questions. I'm going to save the more technical questions for offline. I don't know if you can handle those, but Sue Saunders says, look, there's some changes that are going on where in the future you're going to have EVs with bidirectional charging, more storage capacity. How would that affect the ability of heat pumps to lower greenhouse gas emissions.
It will all help, but all I can say is the gap is huge, and so the balancing gap, and it keeps getting bigger. Is just we need everything. We need all hands on deck. Is really what it comes down to. But yes, storage is critical, 100%. We'll see how, like, it remains to be seen how much bi-directional charging will actually take hold. I think there's a lot of questions on that still. Storage is awesome. That's expensive. So it's really, the answer to the question is not one or the other. It's yes, yes, yes. And we still need more on top of that. And then the last one real quick, I can just address real quick on ESI. So the only thing we're saying on like direct control is we focus on what did you deliver and what is it worth? And I think this is an important point, but we'll remain to see how it actually plays out. But there's a lot of different tech out there that communicates in a lot of different ways. There's a lot of different customers. So our approach really is just leaving direct control up to the aggregators, which is, you know, if I'm working with Ohm Connect, or you might work with Leap or anybody else, you know, there's letting the market figure out how to control and engage with everything rather than trying to have like a central dispatch functionality, which sounds really good, but is highly unlikely to be successful for all sorts of reasons we could talk about. But it just doesn't tend to. And I don't know about you guys, but I own everything in my house. I don't feel like turning it over to my utility, by the way, for what it's worth. No offense, Alex. I mostly think of the other utility when I say that. But in general, it's true, though. There's like everything in my house. There's not a single thing in my house that is a grid resource. Every single thing I have is my HVAC system and my heat pump. I mean, is to keep me warm and keep it cool in my house when it's hot outside. And my lights are about my kids doing homework, and my car is about driving. And my batteries are about resiliency, not dispatch. Frankly, we dispatched a bunch of batteries last year during the emergency, but like, frankly, I think that the first time we do that and there is actually a blackout and customers with batteries can't keep their lights on, maybe the last time that those customers will ever let us do it again. So anyway, it's an all of the above strategy is what it comes down to. But we do think more in terms of like distributed systems, like all of that, the open ADR and all that's great. It's just, do we really think there will be, or do we want to have like some central command and control? And my opinion is no, but opinions vary on that one.
Matt, is it the case that large agencies like Marin Municipal Water District, the North Marin Water District, or the Marin Sanitary District that have professional staffs, that they've already gotten whatever benefits that they can get from shifting their use? Or to what extent do your do demand flexibility programs affect them, and there's some possibilities for gains there?
I think there is a lot of opportunity there. Alex can probably speak to this. Now, we're like the McDonald's of M&V, and so when you get into like large custom things, our methods stop really making sense. You know, we can't easily predict when a pump would be running on a large water district that there's one of, right? Which doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It just means you need like engineers. You need to look at that individual site, and it's but I do, so it, you know, we tend to focus on everything from residential to office buildings and schools and, you know, grocery stores and whatever. But when you get into like custom and like large industrial or like a water plant, you know, you tend to need, we can't create a comparison group. There's nothing to compare it to. Like our models, doesn't respond to insole or weather or other things. So it's not what we focus on. And it doesn't, not to say it's not important. It's just not the type of mathematics we do. But I think there's still a ton of opportunity with those major players who I think to really optimize when they're pumping water and all those sorts of things.
Okay. I think we're going to have to
move
on and get to Alex Valenti. Do want to thank you, Matt, for your terrific presentation, and on a subject that can be very difficult to understand. So thank you. And there are a couple of I think there are a couple of other questions in chat, so we'll just have to leave them for now. Any last words, Matt?
Not at all. We covered a lot. Sorry to talk so long, if anything.
No, you were terrific. Thank you so much. Okay, so So why don't we move to Alex Valenti? And so I'm just moving things around here. Alex is works in customer services for MCE Clean Energy, and he has been, among the things that he's worked on is the MCE Peak Flex Market program. And Alex, why don't you explain what it is that you do? You can add some background on yourself and take it from here.
All right, thank you very much, Bob. And thanks to Matt. You're a tough act to follow. But yeah, my name is Alex Valenti. I am a program manager with MCE within our customer programs group. We primarily purchase electricity, renewable portfolios that far exceed PG&E and provide that to customers like yourself. But within our organization, we have programs that deliver value in a number of different ways, one of which is in our energy efficiency portfolio. And so that's kind of where I reside. I'll pull up my screen. Let me know if you can see it. And our programs, wide ranging, again, typically the ones I work on are focused on commercial energy efficiency. And over the more recent years, we've teamed up with Recurve to kind of innovate some of these energy efficiency programs. And I think what Matt just spoke about covers a huge landscape of what we're trying to accomplish in this space. And a lot of it is really keyed in and enabled by the platform that Recurve has put together to really leverage the AMI data to be able to account for and validate and value energy saved at specific hours of the day. Part of that platform and the technology kind of leveraging the AMI data leveraging, we were able to kind of push the envelope for EE and try to kind of combine some DR, some demand response principles within our EE portfolio. And we created what we call as the Peak Flex market. And so the Peak Flex market is really kind of a DR plus program that's within our EE portfolio. And before I kind of go into the presentation, there was a question related to funding. And so our programs for our EE program and for this Peak Flex program are provided by the CPUC. As Matt alluded to, there's a surcharge on everyone's bill for public purchase funds that fund these programs. And so this is one of the programs funded through that mechanism. Same with ELRP, same with all of the traditional IOU programs that PG&E and others are able to provide. So just want to clarify that that's where the funds are coming from. And so Recurve just is one of the program implementers that allows us to administer these programs with those funds. So that's kind of just the structure there. So I'll move on here. So as alluded to prior, Matt talked about, we're really in this position where there are some serious challenges during the summertime. We're faced with increased GHG emissions in this summer peak for peaker plants, and MCE's goal from the onset over 10 years ago was to figure out ways to reduce GHG electricity, to reduce electricity, reduce load. And so we're really trying to figure out ways to further that. So this Peak Flex program allows us to incentivize load reduction and load shifting during those periods of time to really face these challenges. Kind of the timeline of how this program came to be. We, predecessor to myself, worked with Recurve in 2020, 2021 to really leverage this data platform and come up with a program that can then shift this load out of the peak period. So this started in 2021. It just so happened to be kind of right along the time when there was some severe fires that happened, and there was some big challenges with energy supply. And so Governor Newsom came out with an emergency proclamation, which then downstream led to some regulatory shifts and created the MAP program. And so in December 2021, we were able to leverage our own funding in the pilot and then build out the program more with ratepayer funds. And so we launched last summer the program officially utilizing ratepayer funds. And so what the program really is, in its part, is an aggregator-driven load shifting and demand response program. So as Matt said, the program and suite of programs with the demand flex markets are really leveraging contractors, we call them aggregators, or technology providers, service providers who have the solutions to reduce load. A lot of what Matt was talking about is kind of a transformation of energy efficiency. So this base load reduction, and this program is really looking at what's the incremental reduction that these technology providers can provide. So it's really not so much as a technology solution. It's more about how to leverage existing technologies, behavior, controls, batteries, and how to further reduce during those peak periods. And so our program, as mentioned before, is really to reduce these loads during this period of time, during the summer, in response to grid instability and reducing GHGs. So right here, this is a depiction of what our daily load shape is in MCE, not different than the state. We're really, again, trying to focus on moving energy out of that period, that kind of 7 to 9 period, like Matt mentioned, is really the highest intense period where the peaker plants are really running and the GHG emissions are the highest. So that is where we're trying to push people out of. So it's really shifting any technologies to that midday no or low GHG generation period is really the goal. So how do we get there? Again, there's kind of traditional end uses that can be modified. So technologies that are already installed. So HVAC controls, so there's smart thermostats, there's more sophisticated building management systems. Those we saw really created the most results. So it's, modifying what that cooling load set point is. So increasing it a few degrees when it's hot. Pre-cooling, which is when an operator of a facility would be able to kind of put the temperature down in that noon to 3 or even prior to reduce the temperature of the building in advance of that peak period. There's some other strategies in terms of ducting and fan usage, and so it gets pretty sophisticated if a facility operator is capable of doing so. But HVAC controls is one of the largest levers that we have to pull. Lighting obviously is another significant end use throughout most buildings. So a building control system or just simple green teams at a commercial office building being educated on how to find areas that aren't in use and turn them off. So there's lots of other kind of more manual approaches that can be devised, but it really comes down to an organization or a facility operator being able to implement those. In our kind of larger commercial buildings or industrial process production, so being able to kind of move production out of those hours, rescheduling production lines or things, or some strategies more for programs like Matt was talking about that are kind of customized or site level NMEC, but we are able during the demand response events to be able to have industrial customers participate. And then lastly, energy storage is, obviously an easy way to reduce load during those periods of time. So we're trying to call on and dispatch batteries that are both behind the meter residential as well as some commercial operations as well. So it's a challenge in many regards, to install this equipment that's costly, but it obviously is a big part of the narrative in story on how we're going to really be able to reduce peak and deal with the onset of electrification on the grid. One of the things that we've also done is we are acting as an aggregator for some select customers. So the way that the aggregator model works is that obviously an aggregator is going to take a piece of the value generated for their own solutions and services. But what we're trying to do is for some larger customers is kind of provide this kind of direct incentive and direct pass through of the value. So we were fairly successful in having a cohort last summer, and we're going to have those similar customers and a few more join us for this summer. But essentially, we're able to provide this to, again, larger customers who have a dedicated staff member to actually provide, or implement those strategies. Yeah, we've had a pretty good success. We had one customer in Contra Costa County who had a suite of 20 buildings. They were able to respond to the heat dome event last September and generated about $15,000 worth of grid value that was passed along, as well as an estimated $3,000 in on-bill savings just from those 10 event days. So it's fairly significant, the potential if the loads can be controlled. So kind of in a similar vein, this table right here just kind of depicts what it would look like from just the DR response in terms of the value paid out for 4 different building types. So it varies. This is assuming that there's a 5% reduction in capability for the 10 days that we assumed for this. So it's not gonna pay for capital equipment, but it's a way for folks to be compensated, right, for participating, for sacrificing. And I think that's another thing to think of DR and load shifting is it's that further reduction, and folks need to consider sacrificing some of those comforts. As Matt said, everything in his house is not necessarily a grid resource, right? It's utility. But I think if we have to kind of switch our brain a little bit and understand that we do need to make sacrifices for the collective good and reduce some of our comfort levels. And so this is a way to pay for that sacrifice. So what were the results last summer? So for daily load shifting, the participation was mainly through smart thermostats. So we had roughly just short of 600 sites. I'm not going to read off all these statistics, but in total, we were able to reduce about 40 megawatt hours of load during the 4 to 9 period, with a maximum reduction of 3 megawatts at one given hour throughout the program. From a demand response side, we had just over 2,000. And as mentioned, we had a portfolio of our own customers, which constituted 35 sites. So we're growing that for this summer. And if there's anyone who's on the call who is a facility operator or has someone who is working in an office that would be interested in participating, feel free to reach out. We're happy to include more folks in our program. So what did we learn? Really, as I mentioned before, building automation is key. So taking that, kind of manual approach, there's just more of a challenge in folks day to day. So increasing the accessibility and allowing aggregators to, provide a little bit more coaching and engineering, I think, can really crack the nut, so to speak, for better results. And one thing we found in communicating, trying to recruit our own customers, is that it's really more about being proactive than being reactive. We get these notifications that there's a flex alert, and people are able to provide reduction in use as they're able. But as organizations, as facility operators, being able to come up with a plan in advance will provide greater savings and reduction. So, being a part of that planning, I think, is really key as an individual, and then obviously participating in our program, being able to identify those things in advance. And these are things that will be, replicable in the future. And then, as I mentioned, this kind of idea of educating operators that sacrifices can create impacts. So facility management, their main goal is to reduce hot and cold calls. And, they want their KPIs are based on that, and they want to really create comfort for the building occupants, which makes sense. But again, these few handful of days where we really need resources, there's ways that we can either change staffing, or I think there was one customer that mentioned that they had like Hawaiian shirt day that they were going to plan and serve iced tea so that people would be a little bit more willing and able to have the set point higher. So there's strategies to kind of overcome some of those issues. And then ways that we can grow. So again, tied into the automation. So we, MCE, we are kind of limited to a paradigm where our programs have to be cost effective because we use money from the ratepayers. So we have to find other funds to kind of offset some of these capital costs to increase controls and control strategies. And so state funds, federal funds would be really important in leveraging to be able to make these programs cost effective and more impactful, to kind of offset that capital cost that would enable more distributed energy resources that can be kind of called upon during events. Other ways, obviously battery storage is key. This is a developing market. And VDG, so vehicle to grid. So these rolling batteries that we're rolling out and will continue to be rolling out. It'll be really interesting to see how that technology evolves in fleet applications. It's critical. And then how do we crack the nut on managed charging in residential, and how can we call on that resource during the 4 to 9 period. And then lastly, and we'd be very grateful for anyone who's interested in submitting comments in the near future, is to gain approval for us to continue to get funding. So we did get funding for last summer and this summer, but there's a question on if we'll continue to receive funding for this program in the future. So any support in that regard would be grateful. I would be grateful. MCE would be grateful, because it is a great opportunity where we can provide this kind of flexibility, and DR program for more customers than the traditional DR programs, which can be and will be continuing to be a really good resource in the future. So with that, happy to answer any questions. I didn't see any in the chat here, but happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Alex, for your presentation. That was very helpful, telling us what MCE is doing. I do want to say that I watched your title. You're a Senior Customer Programs Manager for MCE. Apologies. I guess I have a question, which gets to something I raised earlier, which is for government departments, for marin agencies, like water districts or sanitation districts. What's been the uptake, and is there anything that advocates can do to help out in getting increased uptake for the program?
So our engagement team has reached out to pretty much all of the larger municipal agencies to try to recruit into the program. And I think, you know, it's about building the political will to invest in staff time to do some of the necessary planning and implementation. I think that's kind of the challenge, is a lot of the municipal agencies are short-staffed, and this does take a little bit of a manual effort if there isn't any you know, automation systems involved. So I think, yeah, that's really part of it, right, is calling on the need for this is to be integrated into operations. And then I think there was a conversation or a question before about some of the water districts and kind of industrial customers. And I think the challenge there may be that they are already optimized in terms of time of use rates, really shifting what they can out of the peak period. But that the kind of process need to deliver, you know, whatever water service or others, you know, utility service at that given time, you know, they don't have enough wiggle room, so to speak, without implementing different technologies and investing in capital equipment. So there's a little bit of an economic constraint with being able to flex during those periods for those particular customers.
Okay, if there are no other questions, I think we'll wrap this up. Again, I want to thank both of you, Matt and Alex, for your presentations. It was really helpful information. And I think that's it. Thank you again.